Affairs Now, the online learning community for those of us working in, alongside, and adjacent to higher education and student affairs. I'm your host, Heather Shea, and we are recording this episode today at 4:23 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, April 10th. As always, things might have changed by the time you listen. Each week, we have been breaking down the shifting landscape of higher education, what's happening, why it matters, and how we can respond. Dr. Nolan Cabrera raised a crucial question. What does it mean to navigate this moment with both awareness and action? This week, that moment feels particularly urgent. I feel like it's felt urgent the entire time, but we're gonna talk about more urgency today. From rising political interference in governance to escalating federal actions targeting students and institutions to a fraying relationship between higher ed and the federal government. These are, as we know, not isolated stories. They are connected to a broader shift in how power, politics, and higher education intersect. And so we will be breaking this all down today with two expert correspondents. I'm super excited to welcome back again Dr. Demetri Morgan. Welcome back.
Hello. Good to be back.
You are an expert in institutional governance, campus climate, student activism, and STEM education in higher education, and Dr. Morgan is an associate professor of education down the road from me at the University of Michigan.
Today. Now I'm grouchy. Snowed.
It snowed today?
Snowed today.
It did.
Yeah.
There was snow
Don't
on the ground.
Don't send that this way. Keep it up there. I just got out of the it's snowing again.
Yeah.
Disposition. Yeah. So you all keep that up there.
Yeah. It's the fall spring, I think is what they call it. And then we're back to winter. So welcome back, Dr. Commodore, Dr. Felecia Commodore. It's great to have you.
Same. Glad to be back.
Dr. Commodore is an expert in leadership, governance, and administrative practices in higher ed with a focus on HBCUs, MSIs, and Black women in leadership. She is an associate professor in educational policy, organization, and leadership at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So great to have you both here with me today. We are going to break down three big news stories really quickly and then get into the conversation. So we have been tracking several different major stories, and it's always every week a little bit difficult to figure out which ones we want to highlight. But today we're going to start with a piece that was inspired actually by an opinion piece that Dr. Morgan published in Inside Higher Ed. So, you know, we're really interested in who is speaking up, how they're speaking up. And you noted in your piece that boards of trustees or governing boards are often the sleeping giants of higher education governance. But we know that in the face of rising political interference and threats to institutional independence, boards should be playing potentially a bigger role in defending academic freedom, institutional mission, and autonomy. Dr. Morgan wrote that we are seeing a shift from shared governance to scared governance. I thought that was a good line. And the consequences are really profound. So as of today, or maybe this was actually yesterday, more than $3 billion in federal funding has been threatened or cut from higher education. And so my question is, when will trustees step up and fulfill their fiduciary duties to protect their institutions? So that's the first topic. The second topic. What's that?
Just wanted to shout out Dr. Raquel Rawl with her co-author on that piece as well. Yeah.
Dr. Raquel Rawl also co-authored that piece. So thank you to you both. And we're linking that in the show notes for today so people can access that directly. The other thing I noted this week is that national media coverage, including NPR's Politics podcast and The Daily from the New York Times, has increased attention to the longstanding but increasingly fragile relationship between higher ed and the federal government. In the piece on The Daily, they talked about a once 70-year partnership rooted in research, education, and the public good has turned adversarial and even hostile. So in recent weeks, we know there have been threats to cut federal funding. There have been actual cuts, not just threats. There have also been attempts to limit speech, revoke student visas, and politicize accreditation processes. The Chronicle reported that federal pressure on accreditors may be the next powerful lever of political control. And I think
I've been saying this.
That is scary beyond belief, right?
I think if you go back like 2 episodes, this was the thing that was keeping me up.
Yep.
And here it is, the Chronicle is naming it. And then I, personally am thinking a lot about our international students. Inside Higher Ed reported as of April 8th, today, it's more than 100 colleges and over 450 international students and recent graduates whose visas have been changed or revoked with little or no explanation. And, if we've worked in higher ed for a little while, that student visas were pretty routine, but they now seem to be caught up in a larger political battle, raising, for me, urgent questions about how institutions are supporting their international students in this moment. All right, so let's get into it. We have some big shifts to discuss. So, Demetri, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk a little bit about the framing of your piece, but what responsibilities you see boards and trustees really have in defending institutional autonomy right now?
So, one of the things that Dr. Rawl and, along with Dr. Commodore, we've been saying over the last few years is that, if boards aren't involved, particularly in justice and equity efforts, that the level of sustainability of those efforts is always in jeopardy. And, we've been yelling and screaming and, trying to get out there with that message, but it's hard because boards are sort of out of sight, out of mind for many students, faculty, and staff. And that sort of neglecting them in our consciousness has then allowed for when boards want to assert their authority for the types of dynamics that we've seen, both in terms of them being the arbiters of some of the challenging, dynamics on campus, like we see in some of the Southern institutions, or also just kind of standing pat and not doing much and not knowing how to defend diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, as an example. So in this piece, and one of the things we've been trying to do is just consciousness raise to say, hey, boards have a role to play. We see faculty activated, we see student organizations activated, we see staff. NADAHE was one of the first, the chief diversity officers was one of the first associations to be a part of lawsuits. Kind of everybody is playing their roles in trying to resist or push back or kind of influence what's going on in boards and in the associations that typically represent boards. The Association of Governing Boards, AGB, have been relatively silent in comparison to the activity that we've seen in other domains. And so, this piece had been in the works for a few weeks now, but to really say like, hey, where are the boards? And both as a call into boards, but also as a way for other actors in this space to also ask that question and to really get into it. I think, and I would love Dr. Commodore's perspective. I still think, even as I've been trying to share with different groups and different people, that people have a skepticism and a sort of disdain for whether boards should actually be involved. And I think sometimes that puts me in opposition to faculty senates or other groups that I'm talking with. But I'm not sure how we navigate successfully this particular moment if boards aren't involved. And so really it's just trying to start that conversation for student affairs professionals, for student groups to say, hey, part of your request, part of your engagement has to include you engaging the board. And it's not as straightforward as, kind of going to, protest at the chancellor's house. Like, the board is not always present. They're actually very rarely present on campus. So you have to have different strategies and different ways of communicating. And I don't think that part of the consciousness in some of these efforts is there.
Yeah. Dr. Commodore, what would you like to add to this?
Yeah, other than I just want to say once again that we have been screaming this from the mountaintop for maybe like 7, 8 years now. And I just hate when we're right. So
yeah.
But yeah, I think to Demetri's point, we often um we often let boards be hidden,
Mhm,
and we often don't even think about boards until we're in crisis.
mhm,
And we're in crisis, right? Like as a field or as an industry, if you want to look at it that way. It's so interesting. I just did a presentation, a workshop yesterday, where part of the framing of that I talk about higher education and being in a social contract with US
mm,
society, right?
mm,
And one of the things that I mentioned in that framing is that there's three major entities from my vantage point that make up this social contract. You have government, you have industry, and you have higher education institutions,
mhm,
right? And so if we think about those three entities making up the social contract, then we understand that what fractures the contract is when one or more of those parties decides they don't want to hold up the contract anymore, right? And I think that's what we're starting to see with some of these actions.
mhm,
And when that happens, all kinds of things get impacted: economy, society, health, all these things, because part of the reason or the motivation for that social contract is that we believe that all three of these entities support and work with each other to create the society that we want, right? So when it starts to fracture, the society we thought we wanted falls apart. I wanted to use that framing because one of the things that I posit, and I know we posit in our work too, we've done some work around boards, particularly system level boards as or state level boards as intermediaries, but really thinking about who are the levers. If we think about
mm,
levers, who are
mhm,
the levers that sit in betwixt and between these three entities
mm,
within this contract? And I argue that that's the board of trustees. Your
mhm,
trustees are often people who fall at those intersections.
mhm.
They have a foot or an interest in between government, industry, and
Yeah,
institutions.
yeah.
So if we're seeing a fracturing of that contract, that's having that we know having and we know is going to continue to have an effect, a dire effect on a society we're trying to build and uphold, then it's those levers that we need to pull and activate in order to keep the bottom from falling out.
Mhm,
And so, as much as, and I agree, I say stuff like we should probably have a better relationship with boards, and faculty want to throw me out the window, but I do think we have to understand the where they sit in power. And I
yeah.
think in addition to us as higher education stakeholders understanding that, um, I think boards need to understand that, which is why I really enjoyed Demetri and Raquel's piece, because I think also board members don't always or aren't always able to identify how they can be levers in making sure things move where they should move or don't move in ways that they should move. But I think that board members, because of their unique positioning betwixt and between those three entities within
Mhm,
that social contract, really can play a role in making things shift in a
mhm,
particular type of way, whether that is through being vocal, but also through resources,
mhm,
how they can impact resource flow, their networks, how they can leverage network and social capital and the power behind that. Um, I think it is not lost on me that a number of the institutions that we're seeing at least reported with such kind of the big billions of dollars being lost are institutions that, if we look at their boards, has some of the most powerful people sitting on
yeah,
them, wealthy people sitting on them, representation from some of our most major corporations across the country. That is a lot of social network power,
yeah.
right? So the question is, one, do these board members know what to say or or know what to do? Two, how do they leverage that power
Mhm,
for the betterment? Then I think also, and this, the cynic in me shows up once more, are the board members in cahoots with the contract falling out, right? Because that's I think that's also a very
Yeah.
honest conversation that we have to have, is
Mhm.
that um maybe some of the things we're seeing were things that some of our board members already wanted to go in motion, and this gives them an opportunity to move that way. And that is something we need to also be aware of. And this is something I've been passionate about for many years in the work that we've done, me and Demetri Morgan, like board composition matters.
Yep.
Yes.
And who's on these boards, the values they bring, the things they're connected to matter. And I think now is the time, and board members aren't gonna like me for this, but we need to start doing some interrogation
Mhm.
of where people
Mhm.
stand, what their values are, and so that we have information as advocates for higher education of how we may need to move. But I absolutely think they are important levers in this, and we do need to be more intentional as higher education stakeholders of understanding how to build relationships with those levers and how we can use those levers.
Mhm.
Really well said.
Yeah, I mean, I think the piece that I'm hopeful about, and before we started recording, I mentioned that, you know, my colleague Keith Edwards keeps talking about the positive, like, I see this happening, I see this happening. Like, if we can start repairing some of those cracks or address some of the levers, as you call it, like, and that's illuminated through the larger media, right? So this NPR and New York Times pieces, I think, are interesting. There's interesting implications for the public discourse about
Mhm.
how we are spotlighting institutions and the threats that are facing them. And the piece particularly I'm thinking about is the one with President Eisgruber from Princeton.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know if either of you have thoughts about, like, is this a hopeful movement, or is this is this less hopeful? Dr. Commodore,
I,
I'll start with you.
I'm gonna jump in first because I
Yeah.
tend to be the least hopeful of the two of us, but and I want to leave the people on a high note. Think it. I am encouraged that we are having more of the discussion in visible, larger platforms than
Yeah.
just within our own community. However, I'm a person that lurks about on the Facebook streets,
Mm.
because I like to see how people, like the people of the world, are talking about these
Yeah.
things. And one of my concerns, though, with the way the conversation is happening, and it's there's a tension here, and I'll explain that in a minute, is who we're talking about.
Yeah.
And not that I want us to start, bringing any spotlight to the regional comprehensive, the
Mhm.
folks. I kind of want them to stay in the shadows.
Mhm.
But I think the challenge that I'm seeing with the public discourse is that the regular everyday person who we need to be motivated to support our institutions, when they see a Columbia lose billions of dollars,
Mhm.
it means nothing to them.
Yeah.
Because most of them do not have any connection to
Yeah.
a Columbia, to a Penn, to a Harvard, right? And also, we have not done a good job of explaining how endowments work.
Right.
So when they
It's
see that Columbia has lost $9 billion or whatever it was, they're like, well, they have 150 billion in their endowment. And so what? Right. And I literally was, and I need to really stop lurking around the Facebook streets. I literally found myself in this conversation where it's like, this is quite how endowments work, right? But the
yeah.
person was literally like, if they have multi-billion-dollar endowments, what do they need our tax money for? Right. And so when I saw that, I was like, that's, these are things we need to know, because what we don't make the connection to is what's happening to Columbia will happen to your regional comprehensive institution down the road, where most of the kids from your high school that went to college go to college, where most of your nurses are getting their nursing degrees so that they can staff your hospitals
Mhm.
and your nursing homes and feed their families, right? Where, your teachers are getting you the connection isn't made
Mhm.
because what we though we're talking about it, we're talking about it from these institutions that we see as a society the same way as we see wealthy people.
Mhm.
And the same way you saw people when the tragedy of the fires was happening in California, and there was this cognitive people like they're rich,
Yeah.
not worried about their house burning down. I think we're seeing similar kind of reactions from the general public. So I want us to talk. I'm encouraged that we're talking about it, but I think we need to bring it closer to home
Mm.
and into people's neighborhoods, because right now we're talking about very wealthy institutions losing money, and I don't know that it's making the connection
Yeah.
that we want it to make, that we need it to make.
Yeah.
Really, really similar, and I'll sort of keep it in Michigan for a second. But
Mhm.
for those that follow politics, political junkies, our governor in Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, kind of caused some a stir, we'll say, because
Just
she
read that.
Yes, she did.
she went to the White House, and for me, this connects to the question because I think for a long time we've said, higher education's relationship with the community, kind of to the social contract, and how we message and talk about the outcomes of higher education, the public benefit, have not resonated. And I think, one of the things that, I think Governor Whitmer was trying out is we have to figure out what messages are going to land and bring
Mm.
people along. And part of that means putting the sort of discourse out there. And some people loved it, some people, hated it.
Mhm.
But, at least in the sort of Democrats, it's like, what messages are going to resonate? And I think
Yeah.
that is the same thing in higher ed, where I'm glad to see this discourse start to move, because I think we have to message test and we have to understand which things are going to break through the noise, which things are going to resonate and be compelling to people in the way for us to talk about, what we do in society, what we, I think a lot of people were like, oh, well, NIH is being cut. We're just gonna go out and say, oh, this is gonna stop cancer. And I lost my mom to cancer, and so that's compelling for me.
Mhm.
But like Felicia said, it's like, well, my local places maybe doing cancer research. Why does Columbia need all of those billions of dollars? Like
Yeah.
I think people were shocked that it wasn't a more resonant message that all these clinical trials were going to stop. And I think
Mhm.
we need to keep message testing. So I think, I was saying, former President Obama, in one of a graduation speech, was talking about higher ed. I think we need more messengers talking about it and it being, because eventually something's going to break through and people will be like, okay, like, yeah, maybe we should frame it like this. Maybe we should talk about this, but we're still very early in that. And so those people who are putting out there, kind of like Governor Whitmer, you're a lightning rod. You're going to get, your head chopped off a little bit, because she's one of the first, sort of Democrats to try out this new message of kind of walking with Trump, but not too close, and drawing the line, but keeping it state focused. It's a really tough needle to thread, and I think higher ed is trying to do a similar thing. But also to the board point, we don't we're trying to operate muscles we haven't used. We're asking board members
Yeah,
to do
Yeah.
things that we
yeah,
haven't asked them to do, nor train them for, nor prepare them for. And to Dr. Commodore's point, like not thought about as we constructed these boards compositionally. And so now we're like, hey, defend us. And it's like, you just told me to write a check and show up for, cocktail hour, and now you want me to like be doing more than that.
yeah,
Like that's not what I was told this was. And so I think we also have to, by no means am I running interference or being, apologetic for boards, but there has to be sort of training and development, message testing, those things to make sure that what we're sharing and how we're sharing it is actually doing the type of bidding for higher education that we think is going to be productive.
Yeah.
yeah. And I want to add to this because I like this idea of message testing.
Yeah.
And I think we also have to do a better job of message testing outside of our bubbles, right? We message test to each other. It's like, I already know how you're going to respond for the most part to my message, right? And this
Yeah.
this is why Liquor bowed on the Facebook streets, because I think we have to see how folks who already don't have a strong value in or trust in higher education, what is the message that's going to resonate with them? And I think often we come from a place assuming people already see the value in higher education. And I talk about this um, with my class often, is that I think it's higher ed has a harder sell than K through 12. Because K through 12, it's easier to make the connection to the neighborhood. And as the saying goes, all politics are local, right? And so I think I see the kids in my neighborhood. I see the schools in my neighborhood. This directly impacts, even if I don't have children, it impacts my life. But I think the way higher ed has been positioned in our society, particularly in the last 30 or 40 years, it seems more like a private good than a public good, right? And so if I don't participate in it, if no one connected to me participates in it, or if they participate in it and it seems like they're doing worse than I am, right? That didn't participate in it, there is a distrust and there is a lack, I think, of motivation to get behind putting money in, investing in, getting enthralled in these conversations about a space that I feel like that was your decision to get involved in that. That has nothing to do with me and my, eggs, right? Right.
The eggs.
Right, the infamous eggs. And so I think we have to, with this message testing, we have to get back to that mantra of all politics are local, whether that's your state level, whether that's your community. And I talk about this often, like we saw with COVID what would happen if we had let institutions completely close and bottom fall out. I mean, whole state economies were on their way to tanking, right? We look at, I think about a University of Pennsylvania, which is a very wealthy institution. And I think when we just talk about it generally, it's like, oh, well, they're rich, right? Like they have this big endowment. Who cares? They lose money. But we also forget to say, University of Pennsylvania is the largest employer of the city of Philadelphia, which is a majority Black city, majority Black working class city. So when University of Pennsylvania goes down, the neighborhood loses jobs. People lose jobs. That causes all kinds of challenges, from childhood hunger, access to healthcare, all these things, because this one university, which is a major economic driver in this city, did not get the support it needed to do, or had to move in fiscally conservative ways because of the way in which the government has pulled money from them, right? We have to jump to that message as well, as the research that's happening, right? Because I can't see research and I can't eat it, right? And so I really want us to rethink about it. And I do think there are some states that are doing some really good work with that, some state leadership who are like messaging at the state level. Like, we know we need these institutions to keep our state afloat. And I just want us to when we're message testing, just remember who we're testing to.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot for a while, partially because of the cost of higher ed, right? And the fact that it's not subsidized to the extent that it is in other countries is a fascinating demonstration of it being an individual benefit versus us collectively believing that an educated populace is a common good or is a public good. And I think about, so I think I'm gonna shift us to the international student piece, because when I think about students who are coming to the U.S. primarily, maybe because of the reputation of the institutions and because of the opportunities to do research alongside faculty who are, receiving grants from the federal government to sustain long-term research. And now these student visas being just like wholesale revoked, it feels we talked about due process last week, in terms of one person supposedly doing something, right, that then warranted their deportation. Like, what are we doing when we revoke 450 student visas across the US? And how do we as student affairs, as higher ed, start speaking about that in a way that might help address this larger concern of us as global citizens?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is the human side, right?
Yeah.
Like these are our students
Yeah.
that, are in our classrooms, that partake in the services, the centers that we provide. And their sort of safety, mental health, and well-being has already, been stretched and is now sort of in this hyper, like, am I next? Is my roommate next? And so I think just like pausing to honor that is really important, because it's like one thing to sort of think about the system and these numbers, but like, these are like peers, these are colleagues of people that we're working with, and telling that story as part of it, I think is really hard to do, but it's really important. I think that the second layer that I have been thinking a lot about is to Felicia's point about people not understanding endowments. The other thing that is really tricky part of this conversation that I don't think we're ready to have yet as a larger community and a campus community is that when we understand how tuition it comes into institutions, and especially
Mm-hmm.
for institutions like ours, you have out-of-state students and you have international students
Yep.
who make up a big bulk of what we would say is full pay students, especially at the master's level for many institutions, but
Yes.
also at the undergraduate level. And so the sort of economics of this of while 450 is too many for me, for institutions, it's like, oh, okay. But if it is ramped up, and as we're seeing, as a pattern with this administration, if you let them take a little, they're just going to keep taking
Keep going.
and so at
Mm-hmm.
what point, and by the point that they take enough, things will be so drastically out of order for institutions that I can't even fathom. It's up there with accreditation.
Yeah.
So I need us to also honor that the sort of economic, as states have divested and as it's become more of a private good, one of the ways that institutions have made that up have been relying on, full pay students, which come in two
Yeah.
varieties, one being out of state and one being international. And if we don't honor like what that then means to just sort of stand by while the federal government, sort of willy-nilly revokes visas, if I would hope the human side of it is enough to activate you to want to push. But if the human side of putting yourself in somebody's shoes, and thinking about what it would mean to have your visa revoked in the middle of your course of study, not knowing if you can finish, like if those narratives don't get you going, then at least think about the economic impact of this, and be willing to be really honest about how we've sort of stabilized higher ed on the backs of full pay students, and that this plays into that. And I think what to your question of what we can do, one thing as student affairs professionals is to talk about that as sensitively as I'm trying to do here, of what this means economically. Because I don't always know, even unfortunately, I don't always know if senior leaders always understand the sort of economic realities of how this plays out. Obviously, CFOs and certain individuals do, but I don't always know if people understand some of the trade-offs that are made to kind of produce this higher ed experience. And so layering that into this conversation of like, hey, if we don't figure out a way to push back or engage this, when will be enough? And at what point, especially for smaller programs that have, half international students, half domestic students, or whatever the ratio is, at what point, if so many of our students are now no longer enrolled, and also what is the chilling effect? Like, what is the
Yes.
impact?
Oh,
Yes.
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 Who would want to come here? And we've already
Yeah.
seen, that with rhetoric about certain countries, China obviously being one of them, where we've seen declines. But what does that then mean for recruitment? Of different things, and so layering in that at seats that people are at, I think is really, really important, but tough to do without
Yeah.
coming across as callous to the human impact that this has.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of that and um, I do think we're going to have some honest conversations about our financial models that we've built
Yep. Yep.
at our institutions. We are starting to see the cracks in them.
Mhm.
And this is definitely going to, if it continues to escalate, have an impact economically. I do want to say, and I feel like I say this every week, but we did this before.
Yes, we
And I
did.
think we forgot. We
Mhm.
forgot the first administration of the now president,
Mhm.
where this happened. It was a much more compact time period, but I remember it so very clearly because I, at the time, was working with an international student who got notification that just out of nowhere, if they couldn't prove that they had a job in which they were uniquely talented for, right, they were going to be deported in 60 days. The
Wow.
doctoral student. I remember it very clearly. And I watched, the student go through mental distress.
Yeah.
We had to get them counseling. I was concerned for their health.
Yeah.
Because imagine waking up one day and being told you have 60 days to prove you should stay in the country that you're doing your studies, that you've been in as a student for the last
Mhm.
6 or 7 years. You don't really you have a home to go to, but not really, right? And I remember watching the student go through that and just feeling so helpless as a faculty
Mhm.
member. Luckily, we had an institution that rallied behind them. We were able to do what needed to be done, but that student also had to drop out of the program
Yeah.
and get a full-time job at the institution in order to stay. And so that happened in that first administration. And I think we don't remember if you didn't have direct impact because it was very subtle, right? It wasn't as such a big pronouncement as what we're seeing now. So to some extent, I think it already had a test run.
Mhm.
And we forgot about the test run, right? And this happens so much in our society, but in higher ed, where we focus so much on fixing the immediate crisis that we forget to go back
Yeah.
and patch up what we found the crack in when it first happened. And we really think about it when this happened back then,
Mhm.
we should have started thinking about how do we fortify processes to protect our international
Yes, we
students
should have.
if we end up in a situation where the federal government starts to just randomly do these procedures to revoke visas. And we didn't. And now we're paying for it, right? And our students are putting through stress. And it's something I'm concerned about like all the time because a lot of us have, especially at the graduate level, have a number of international students who are good students and doing good work. And they're just trying to be productive citizens here, right?
Yeah.
So to the human side,
Yeah.
it is stressful and frustrating to have to watch a student try and navigate all of this, and especially students with families
Yeah.
because these aren't all kids, right?
Yeah.
These are people with spouses and children. Some of their spouses are US citizens,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so these are just, I mean, from a humanistic standpoint, it's heartbreaking. But I think the other the other element here too is we have to look at how they're going about getting these students, right?
Mhm.
It's not random. They're going after students that they feel like they can make a case are engaging in anti-Semitic behavior or things that we can frame as being enemies of the state, for lack of better
Yeah.
words, right?
Yeah.
And so again, understanding rhetoric, understanding the power of
Yes.
propaganda, right?
Mhm.
The election season set us up for this by painting immigrants as enemies,
Yep.
right?
Sure did.
And I think we thought as higher ed that wouldn't necessarily affect students. We were
Mhm.
thinking more like, migrant workers and
Sure.
folks like that. But now they've turned that narrative on our students. And so I really think institutions have to stand up
Yes.
and defend the honor of our students.
Yeah.
And not just like, oh, this is immoral, but also this is illegal.
Yeah.
Like it's like
Yeah.
we really and I'll be honest, I don't know how to do that, but I think we, and with Demetri and some other conversations been in, we have to figure out what is our anti-propaganda? Like we're like trying to just use facts, and I just don't know if that's facts alone is going to get it,
Yeah.
because we're not fighting facts, we're fighting propaganda.
Mhm.
And so we have to figure out our messaging and what it looks like, and how do we sell our story? How do we invigorate and inspire our folks? People have critiques about the Cory Booker. It wasn't a filibuster. What was it? I forgot what
The
it was called.
longest, yeah, the longest speech. I mean, I think he just held the floor. It
Yeah.
wasn't
So
filibustering any kind of legislation.
yeah. And I think many of those critiques are
Mhm.
valid, right?
Sure.
Formativity or whatever, however you feel. But it did get people going,
Mhm.
right? And think we got to start thinking about
What's the
how
message?
do we get the people going, right? And so in particular with this issue, because what is letting this issue fly is that propaganda has about immigrants and foreigners has been pushed for the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're popping up trying to fight something that we should have been fighting all
Yeah.
along.
Yeah.
So we really have to think about it. And I also think we need to tell the story in compelling ways. I was
Mm-hmm.
talking with a friend of mine who was not connected to higher ed at all, and hadn't even heard about like these students getting picked up off the street by like unidentified ICE
Yeah.
agents or all, and they were like, is that really happening? Yeah, that's all
Watch
should
the
know,
video.
right?
Watch the
But
video.
I think again, we're in our bubble and we think everybody is seeing how this is happening, and it's
Yes.
not, and they're not. And so we really have to start sharing the stories far and wide. If we are going to go after that human element, then we have to go after it hard.
Yeah.
And not just with each other.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's a great point to move towards our final thoughts, because I think messaging is all about where we are. And I think all three of these stories kind of come down to that, right? Like, how are we messaging to boards? How are we messaging the broader public? And then how are we messaging our support to international students? So all right, final thoughts. What's on the horizon? What's keeping you up at night? For me, those feel like the same thing. And then what is bringing you joy right now? So, Dr. Morgan, do you want to kick us off in final thoughts today?
So one of the things I feel like I've been going around the University of Michigan and kind of talking a lot about
Mm,
governance and kind of trying to explain, different things. But one of the things that has come up, at least with Big Ten institutions, and I hope to see it at other across other uh, their associations, I guess, or athletic conferences. That's
yeah,
the word I'm
yeah.
looking for. Is this mutual academic defense compact that Rutgers University started and has now sent to other faculty senates to consider adopting. And basically, to kind of break it down really quickly, think of a compact amongst countries that have kind of mutual defense. If attack on one is considered an attack on all, and therefore resources would be proffered to that particular institution to help them with what they're doing. And so Rutgers kind of adopted that kind of logic to say, hey, as Big Ten institutions, if there are and at the more local level, we call it like mutual aid or mutual support. And where I'm from, it's like just trying to help out your people, right? And so, I think I'm encouraged by that, something to watch to see if other institutions are able to adopt it. I know at Michigan, we're voting on it with a kind of university faculty senate. So that's something that is kind of on the horizon, and we'll see what is that, actually materialize as. Right now, it's just kind of a formal resolution that started at one, but that's how social movements start, right? Like it starts in one place, starts to work. And so that what's bringing me joy, my Florida Gators, anybody that knows me well knows that I am a huge
Thought
Florida.
about you.
And so my Florida Gators won the national championship in basketball on Monday, and it was lovely to just kind of fade away. Although it's really to this messaging point, and this last thing I'll say, I think it was a really big missed opportunity. During the NCAA tournament, men's and women's, some of the highest ratings we've ever seen. Shout out UConn on the women's side. That we weren't, higher ed was not telling its story amidst this. The NCAA was, because the NCAA is going through their own PR crisis.
Right.
And so we know that, there are scholarships and healthcare and all of these things that the NCAA, but higher ed missed a moment to, connect with the public and kind of talk about that. And so I was thinking about that a lot as I was watching games and thinking about, oh man, it's all these commercials and we're not messaging about the sort of collective component. So even in the midst of me sort of celebrating, it was like it was a missed opportunity. And moving forward, we have to do a better job of thinking about how we're messaging with that, with college football starting in the fall being one of those really big things where I would love to see a public campaign really being threaded in partnership with athletics and other entities to tell that story, not just the nice institution specific one or even the conference one, but what is the higher ed story that we want to tell throughout the fall, and would love for people to be thinking about that.
Yeah, that's great. Dr. Commodore?
Yeah, I just to piggyback on that real quick before I get into my things. I also felt like it was a missed opportunity about international students, because athletics often have a number of international students, basketball, football, tennis, swim, lacrosse, baseball, soccer, like they actually bring in a lot of international students. So if these students who help support our athletics aren't there anymore, what then happens? So there was a missed opportunity there as well. But I too, seeing this resolution that Rutgers put forward around the Big Ten really did make my little heart swell. And maybe Demetri, because we're both kind of Big Ten girlies now, but but I think it's a step in the right direction. I think one of the conversations I've been having with folks is the important. We've been talking about kind of individually where we're at, the importance of community, but I think on a more macro scale within higher, what that looks like is collaboration for institutions. And because of what we've experienced for the last couple of decades or so around shrinking resources, around volatile funding practices, discriminatory funding practices, it had created an environment in the marketplace where I do think institutions felt that the way to survive was to compete with each other. We were all going, we all bought into the enrollment cliff. I'm trying not to roll my eyes, but and that made everyone be like, there's only this little market share out there of money, students, partners. And so it's every institution for itself. And what I'm hoping we're seeing now is that that does not work for our sector.
Right.
If in instances where we have to protect these things that we say we value, academic freedom and institutional autonomy, and protecting and serving diverse communities of students and diverse communities and constituencies, well, those things are part of a community mindset. And so if we're going to say these are important values within our sector, the way that we, I think, are able to best protect ourselves from it and fight against the diminishing or destruction of it is through collaboration. And I've always said this as I've become more um, in community with folks in athletics, I have learned so much more about the benefit of athletic associations and athletic what are they called? Conferences and
Yeah.
things like because I think we are taught to that they're just like about conference play and money like for tournaments and things like this. But there are things like library sharing,
Yeah.
like that come out of you being part of the ACC or there's consortiums that are built. There are ways that academic resources are shared and available because of the way these athletic conferences and their agreements are constructed, right, for these institutions. And so I'm glad we're seeing now people being like, oh, there was this infrastructure here that we may not have been using to the best of our ability. And I think the only time we've kind of seen that is the Ivy League, because we forgot that the Ivy League is actually an athletic conference. It's right. It's not some secret society. Like it's right, but they have done a good job over the years of making it an identity as opposed to an athletic conference. And that gave them some leverage to do some things as this quote unquote elite group of institutions, right? And so I'm hoping other conferences and other conglomerates of institutions start to see like we have these structures here that we may have not been using to the best of our ability that can already put us in a place of collaboration. But I think collaboration is the only way we're going to be able to protect ourselves and resource sharing as opposed to resource hoarding. And I think it is our nature in times of crises to hoard, right? We want to say, which is why I think you're seeing some of the movement of these boards and these institutions. They're like, we can't spend, we can't do these things, we can't do these things with the hoard. And I think there's some element of protection of resources that's important, but hoarding, we need to share and we need to put use together wisely what we have. And I think that will put us in a stronger space as a sector. As far as what's bringing me joy, that's a real, um, right now it's two things and they're both on TikTok. And I never thought I'd be a TikTok person, but here I am. One is it is actually it's three things. It is prom dress season, and I love a formal gown. So I am neck deep in prom TikTok to see all the dresses, all the creativity, everyone who's trying to recreate Bridgerton and questioning how are they dancing at prom with these bustles. But prom TikTok has been great. It is also new initiate season for Black Greek letter organizations. So seeing everybody's presentations and everyone crossing into their organizations and becoming members of their organizations. It as a member of a Greek organization, it just brings you back to the day you joined and it's exciting. And I think it's helpful to see with everything going on, college students still finding joy in their experience, right? And reminding us that there's still joy here, there's still resilience of these students, and there's something for us to protect. And then lastly, there is a TikToker, I can't remember her name, but she started a TikTok series called The Group Chat, where she plays all these different characters in a group chat and it has turned into a low-key soap opera. And I am completely bought into all these characters and their shenanigans. And this one character who's trying to bring her boyfriend to dinner and everyone doesn't want him to come to dinner. It's I can't believe it, but here I am Totally bought into
Oh,
the group chat TikTok.
that's awesome.
So that's where we're at.
I love it. I love it. I just did escapism with the new Hunger Games book. That brought
Ooh.
me a lot of joy. Sunrise of the Reaping. So if you haven't read
Hunger
it,
Games quite relevant right
yes.
now.
Yeah, it had this like
On the list.
things are going on. And yeah, oh my gosh, it was fantastic. Shout out
Oh,
to my daughter who recommended I read that.
yes.
Who was a Michigan student of all things. Yeah,
Oh, blue.
go blue.
Oh my gosh, you're already
Actually,
indoctrinated.
my colleagues at Michigan State would be very upset with me right now. So I should definitely do a go green in there. So
I
yeah.
don't know how to do the Illinois thing yet. I'm still,
Still
I'm
learning.
always nervous someone's gonna do it, and I'm like, I'm not ready yet.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. I really appreciate you both and your time. These conversations have come to be, for me at least, really important as I'm thinking about navigating the shifting landscape. And I look forward to the continuation next week. If you haven't been watching and you want to catch up on all of our past episodes, you can go to studentaffairsnow.com/current-campus-context. And I just want to give out a huge thanks to the Student Affairs Now host team, especially Dr. Keith Edwards for shaping this series. We would love to hear from you. If you have specific questions or topics that you would like to hear us cover on future episodes, I think we've got 3 more for the limited series. Please reach out to us at host@studentaffairsnow.com. And thanks again for tuning into Current Campus Context, brought to you by Student Affairs Now. We will see you next week.